Welcome to Lecture of the Lord. I'm Pastor Mark. We are in Joshua chapter 10, and we're going to be starting in verse 12 this lesson. But before we begin, Jeremiah 15:16, Thy words were found, and I did eat them, and thy word was unto me the joy and the rejoicing of my heart. Now, we saw last lesson that the Gibeonites are under attack. Joshua and the children of Israel, the army, goes to Gibeon during the night, and they make a surprise attack upon the five kings. And God also rains hailstones down upon them and kills most of them. Well, I shouldn't say most, but he kills more than what the children of Israel killed. And now we're getting into verse 12 and 13. So let's read verses 12 and 13, and it says, Then spake Joshua to the Lord in the day when the Lord delivered up the Amorites before the children of Israel. And he said in the sight of Israel, Sun, stand thou still upon Gibeon, and moon in the valley of Aijalon. And the sun stood still, and the moon stayed until the people had avenged themselves upon their enemies. Is not this written in the book of Jasher? So the sun stood still in the midst of heaven and hasted not to go down about a whole day. Now we come to another great miracle of God. Both the sun and the moon stand still for about a day, almost 24 hours. The first important thing that we see in this great miracle is that Joshua spoke to the Lord. We see that in verse 12. He says, Then spake Joshua to the Lord in the day when the Lord delivered them up to him. Joshua spoke to the Lord first. Listen, our words mean nothing unless God gives our words substance and power. If we don't go to the Lord and have him give light to our words to people's hearts, they mean nothing. They're powerless. Our words are powerless unless God brings life and light to our words into people's hearts, whether they're saved or not saved. Now listen, in order to better understand this miracle and what Joshua said, and why he said what he said, then we also need to look at a Bible atlas or a Bible map and figure out where Joshua was when he said this. Now, I did all the studying, and I'm going to explain it to you. And if you want, you can, as you're listening to this, you can slow it down and pause it and check all this out if you'd like. But this is very interesting. This sequence of what happens here. So Joshua and his armies arrive in Gibeon in the morning, and they surprise the five kings, and they begin to do battle with them. Now, because Joshua was coming from the east, then the five kings fled to the west, and probably they followed the road up to Beth Horon and Upper Beth Horon and Lower Beth Horon, which are about 6 miles, just a little bit northwest of Gibeon. Now, so you have, they flee from Gibeon, they go west because the Israelites are coming from the east, and so they flee to the west. And as they go west, they're going to these other two cities called Upper and Lower Beth Horon. Now, the city of Aijalon is about 9 miles directly west of Gibeon. Therefore, Upper and Lower Beth Horon are somewhere in the middle between Gibeon and Aijalon. So you have, if you got in the east, let me see, this would be your east. This would be your east. So you have Gibeon, and then you have upper and lower Beth Horon, and then you have Aijalon and on your map. As the 5 kings approach Beth Horon, God casts down great hailstones on them. Now Joshua and his army are in Beth Horon, and they want to defeat the 5 kings as much as possible. But Joshua sees that he will need as much time as possible to do this. He doesn't want nighttime to come and to hinder a complete victory. So he commands the sun and the moon to stand still. Which, now, what does it mean to have the sun and the moon stand still? Remember, Joshua spoke to the Lord, and then he spoke to the sun and the moon, and God did it. God did it for him. But what does this mean that the sun and the moon stand still? So let's take a closer look at what must have happened. Joshua tells the sun to stand still upon Gibeon. Now remember, Joshua is at Beth Horon, and for Joshua to see the sun, he would have to look backwards, back towards the east, where they came from, where the sun was rising. And if the sun was over or upon Gibeon, which he said it was, then it means that it would be in the early morning. The sun would be Joshua would look back at the sun, where they just came from, and he'd see the sun he wouldn't be looking up at the sun, he's looking down towards the rising of the sun. So the sun, it's morning time. The sun has just risen up, and the sun now is over top of Gibeon. Joshua also commands the moon to stand still in the valley of Aijalon. Now, which would be in the front of them to the west. The moon must have been low in the sky just over top of Aijalon. When I say just over top, I don't mean just a sliver. I mean when Joshua looked towards Aijalon, the moon was visible up there, and it was over where he believed Aijalon was. Now the heat of the day would be coming, which would make warfare more difficult. So Joshua commands the sun and the moon to stay right where they are. Why? So that when it's cooler out, you can fight better. When it's hot and muggy, you don't fight as well. And so Joshua commands these two to stop right where they are, and they do. God does it for them. For the sun to stand still, it would literally mean that the earth, not just the planet Earth, but the earth and the sky's rotation would have to completely stop. But this does not mean that the earth stopped rotating around the earth. Around the sun. So the sun and the sky, because if only the earth stopped rotating and the sky kept going, you'd have 1,000-mile-an-hour winds going around the earth, and that's no good. So the whole thing, the whole earth and the atmosphere completely stopped rotating, but it continued to rotate around the sun. Now, for the moon to stand still would mean just the opposite of the sun. It means that the moon could continue to rotate on its axis, but it would stop rotating around the earth. So it was just the opposite. Now, God held it this way for about a whole day. That's what it says in the last part of verse 13. God did this for about a whole day. One more advantage that the Israelites would have is that if the sun was low, just over the rim of the earth, then As the 5 armies looked towards the east at Joshua's army, then the sun would be in their eyes, making it more difficult for them to fight. Yeah, if the sun is way up in the sky, it's not too much of a problem. But when you're looking back, well, you know how it is when you're driving in the morning. If you're heading east, when the sun's just rising, the sun's right in your eyes. If you're driving, you got to close the visor down, or it's right there below the visor, and you got to do something to keep the sun. That's exactly what was happening. The sun was low in the sky, and it helped the Israelites. The Israelites were heading west, and they were fighting towards the west. The 5 kings would have to look back towards the east with the sun in their eyes. Look, God can do anything. God can do anything with his creation. Since God made the laws of nature, then God has the right to overrule them if he chooses. You may say, I know scientifically this and scientifically that. If the Earth stops rotating, la-di-da-di-da-di-da. No. Listen, God made these rules. God can overrule them when he wants to, without any negative effect on people or on the earth. Yes, this is highly impossible with man and with what man knows about nature, but it's not impossible with God. Now it says here also the book of Jasher. He mentions the book of Jasher. Now, the name Jasher means the upright or the righteous. Now, scholars believe that this book of Jasher was a collection of songs or poems of Israel's heroes and about what they did. So they believe that this book of Jasher was a book that had many different songs and poems in it about great things that the children of that leaders in Israel did. Israel, what they did. So it's kind of like odes to their achievements. This book is also seen in 2 Samuel chapter 1 and verse 18. So it was still around even in David's time. So here, this book of Jasher, it's not necessarily, I know you're thinking like I used to think that this was a man who wrote this book about these things. But no, it's a book of the upright. It means an ode to the heroic, or an ode to the upright leaders in Israel. Amazing things that took place. Songs and poems, a collection of poems and songs. Verse 14, and it says here, and there was no day like that before it or after it, that the Lord hearkened unto the voice of a man. For the Lord fought for Israel. Now, it says God hearkened to Joshua's voice because Joshua was in line with the will of God. Joshua's sole desire was to do God's will, which was to cast out the Canaanites from the promised land. Why do half-hearted Christians, listen, why do they not get their prayers answered? Because they are half-hearted. They are attached to too much of this world. They look too much on the things that are seen and not on the things that are unseen. If we would sell ourselves out to God, then we would also see great things happen. I don't mean, you're going to see a mountain move, or you're going to make your car all of a sudden go up here and float over there or something. I don't mean that, but the reason why Joshua got his prayer answered, because he had a heart after God. And the reason why half-hearted Christians don't get their prayers answered is because they're half-hearted. They're not sold out to God. God isn't their number one priority. God is like a second or a third priority. They have other priorities. They got worldly things that take the place of God. They got things that have a higher priority in their life than God. And this is why the prayers aren't being answered. But if we sell out to God and we give our hearts to Him, our prayers will be answered. And you'll see great things happen. You'll see souls being saved that you're praying for because you've given your heart to God. Right, we're going to continue on. Let's go on in verse 15. And Joshua returned, and all Israel with him, unto the camp at Gilgal. Now, apparently, this verse is part of a quotation from the book of Jasher. Listen, actually, Joshua did not return to Gilgal immediately, because we're going to see not until verse 43. Joshua, after this takes place, he doesn't return to Gilgal until verse 43. So verse 15 seems to be an addition from the book of Jasher. All right, we're going to continue on in verse 16. Next lesson. But until then, walk with the Lord. I know He walks with you.